My favorite way of coloring flowers is to create a gradient. Two different colors look great, but often I have troubles blending them together. Therefore, I tend to stick with monochrome gradient, creating the ombre effect. And that's what I'm doing today, coloring flowers, creating a simple gradient using watercolor markers. Also, I will give you a few tips when using these markers for better results, and I will also show you something what happened to this card that you need to keep in mind when using specific colors. Alright, let me first show you the products I used. As I said, I used watercolor markers, more specifically the Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers from Koretake. You can use other brands and other products, but for me, creating monochrome gradients are easiest with watercolor products, specifically with watercolor markers. I normally use watercolor cardstock, but I wanted the paper to be bright white, just to match my card base, so I decided to use Bristol cardstock. Many like using this cardstock with zigs. Not sure about other brands, but I'm not really a huge fan. But I wanted to have bright white cardstock. I needed a card for a wedding. I had this stamp set. It's an old stamp set from Clearly Besotted. I actually haven't used it properly for a card in a video, so I hope you don't mind. I will be pretty much recreating this card design. That means you can use other flower stamp sets. Especially if you have one with tops of the flowers, you should be okay. This video is about the coloring and creating monochrome gradient. The stamp set is completely up to you. So let's get started. First, I stamped the flowers multiple times and I decided to heat emboss the images using white embossing powder. I started by applying anti-static powder over the cardstock, then I inked up the stamps with Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, and then using my heat tool, I melted the powder. By the way, for the stamping, I'm using the Mini Misty stamping tool. I got comments asking what it is. I thought that this is pretty much standard in card making. I was very surprised that people did not know, especially because I'm a very small channel. Anyways, here are the embossed images. I created multiple panels to have enough flowers. Now the coloring. You can use a water brush pen or brush and water. This is just a preference, I will show you both. Also make sure you have a paper towel or cloth on the side. I'm gonna start with the brush and water. To create the monochrome gradient with watercolor markers, you apply the color at the bottom of the petal or leaf if you have leaves, and using a damp brush, wet but not too wet, you go from the bottom to the top, activating the paint and spreading it out. You can experiment starting completely at the bottom and moving the color towards the top, or starting around the edge where the color ends and moving the color towards the top. I kinda do a circle motion with the brush, sort of scrubbing the color. Scrubbing is not the correct word. I'm trying to get the color moving to have a good transition to the lighter color. If the transition is too harsh, I like to scribble the marker on an acrylic block. Anything smooth is fine. And I pick up the color with my brush and apply it where I need it. In this case, over the harsh line. Of course, you can apply the marker directly, but this is when I try to correct something, it gives me more control. Applying directly I do usually when I want to intensify the color. Pretty much redoing the application second time. Sometimes I actually dry the area before applying second layer. To make sure that the color gets lighter towards the top, I activate the paint, clean my brush and apply clean water and repeat. So the color gets lighter and lighter. And that's how I colored all the flowers. By the way, if you have questions about the coloring, just ask in the comments. As I said, you can also use a water brush pen, so I thought I will show it to you on this flower. I almost forgot. I first made sure that the pen is working. What I do, I just squeeze the barrel and get the water going. Then I dry it because sometimes I get too much water out. But after that, I'm ready to color, and once I start coloring, the process is the same. I apply the color at the bottom of the petal, and then I use the pen to move it towards the top. cleaning the brush in between. If you are struggling getting the color moving and you get harsh lines, the issue might be the cardstock you are using. Here I'm using the Bristol cardstock. At the beginning I told you, while many people like to use it with these markers, I'm not a fan because these are watercolor markers. I prefer to use watercolor paper. Bristol cardstock is not a watercolor paper. Let me show you an example. I will be returning to finish the coloring in a bit. Here I'm using watercolor cardstock, more specifically Canson XL 300 grams. So this is not the best watercolor cardstock you can get, but it is still watercolor cardstock and the transition is much smoother. And this doesn't apply only to watercolor markers, it applies, I would say, to all coloring and painting products. Often when you struggle, the cardstock is the problem. So first make sure you are using the cardstock that is made for the coloring product you are using. If you are using the correct cardstock, you might consider checking a different brand. And for example, in watercolor, you have two types of watercolor cardstock, cotton and wood pulp. And cotton cardstock is preferred over wood pulp as it handles water better. With the watercolor markers, you can see here the difference side by side. On the left is watercolor cardstock, on the right is the Bristol cardstock. You can see the results on the watercolor cardstock are much smoother. Alright, let's get back to the coloring for the card. I'm gonna speed it up, play some music, and show you more of the coloring. And after that, I will be adding a few finishing touches, and then I will be assembling the card. And I will also show you something that happened to me that is important to keep in mind. So the coloring is mostly done except of a few finishing touches. Since these are lilies, at least I hope these are lilies, lilies often have these dots on them, which I really like and I wanted to recreate it. So I used the tip of my marker and created dots across the petals. I wasn't sure if it will look good, but luckily it does, at least in my opinion, and I really like the result. And after I finished the dots, I colored the stamen, I think it's called. There I mixed the red and brown. I surprisingly had the coordinating dies, so obviously I had to use them. Otherwise, I would be just fussy cutting. I love coordinating dies, but in my opinion, they are not really needed. I'd rather spend money on something else. After I die cut all the images, I first assembled them the way I wanted them to be. I was going to adhere them directly onto my card base. Also, I made sure that the greeting fits. The greeting is from the same stamp set. And after I was happy, I first took a picture so I don't forget the layout, and then I started adhering. I used double-sided squares and double-sided tape in different thicknesses. You can also double up, I just wanted to have different heights. Also, before removing the backing paper on the tape, make sure you check if the flower fits with the tape attached so you don't ruin your card base. After adhering all the flowers, I trimmed the excess. Technically, the card is done at this point, but I decided to add a few embellishments in the form of clear drops. I used clear liquid glue to adhere them, more specifically glossy accents. So now to my story and what happened with this card. I made this card a month in advance, and it was lying on my desk next to a window. Can you guess what happened? When I was going to send it, this is how it looked. Completely faded. I knew this happens with pinks and purples, especially with these markers, but I did not expect it will happen that fast. While this doesn't happen with every coloring or painting product, the possibility is there. So if you experience this, you can use something like fixative spray with UV protection. I have such spray, and I did not use it, so I thought I will include it here to give you a little warning. Or another solution, do not leave your cards lying next to the window. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the coloring and the card. If you did, I would really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up. If you would like to see photos of the cards, they will be over on my blog, the link is in the description. If you have any questions, make sure you ask in the comments, and I will be back in my next video.